if you get interested in longevity and you realize that we're probably pretty close to reaching this longevity escape velocity, or the ageless era, or whatever you want to call it, right? But it could be 25 years, it could be 50 years, it could be 200 years. But if you look at the totality of how long humans have existed, that's nothing, right? So we're right on the cusp of it. But I mean, you and I, we could be some of the last people that have to die in what we today call a normal lifespan.
Longevity escape velocity, zombie cells, Senolytica, mTOR, rapamycin, and Yamanaka factors. Whether these are familiar concepts or they are new to you, Peter Ottsjö, who is a science and technology reporter at Ny Teknik, has written a book that explains them and connects them to a project that might be the greatest revolution in the history of humanity, the longevity revolution. Not content with learning about the theory of longevity, Peter has also put what he has learned into action. His goal is to live beyond 120 years, or more precisely, his goal is to stay young forever, as is also the title of his book, Evigt ung in Swedish, Forever Young in English. In this episode, we will hear from Peter how he plans to accomplish this goal. Peter, why would you want to live beyond 100, and why would you want to stay young forever?
Yeah, isn't that a weird question though? I mean, it's like asking someone, why would you want to live beyond 70? I mean, the other part of the question we could debate, but the question about living to beyond 100 or 120, those are just numbers, right? And I think that as long as you're healthy, as long as you like living most of the time, I see no reason that you wouldn't want to continue with your life instead of just erasing everything and not be able to do that anymore.
So, how long have you had this strange idea of not wanting to grow old and die?
Well, I think that I've always felt that when people say that we should find meaning in death, and that death serves a purpose, and that we should embrace it, as we talked about at length in the first episode with when I interviewed you, I could never really sympathize with that, or agree with that. It just didn't resonate with me, right? So uh, I think that that has always been with me. But then I was also, and I have always been very interested in technology, and especially, a little more science fiction technology. Not the most outlandish science fiction, but what's just around the corner. And by that I mean, like, what could we do in 10 or 20 or 30 years, right? And so uh, if you follow that scene, if you are interested in futurism, so to speak, you at some point arrive at transhumanism, this uh, philosophical idea almost, or movement that we should enhance humanity with technology. And I think at some point, maybe it was like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, that I probably saw some YouTube video with Aubrey de Grey, and was completely fascinated uh, when I understood that this is actually something that could be feasible quite soon, that we could actually do something about aging and postpone death quite a lot.
So, you are interested in the other aspects of transhumanism as well, apart from longevity. So, you also think it's interesting if we could enhance our cognition or our emotions or even our morality. But isn't longevity the most important thing?
Yeah, I would say that I'm much more interested in the longevity part than for example, enhancing cognition. Of course, I'd like to be a little bit wiser and smarter, but that's not my main ambition in life. Um, so yeah, definitely longevity. But I mean, I'm interested in not just transhumanism when it comes to technology that's just around the corner. I mean, my day job is as a reporter for Ny Teknik, which is a big newspaper covering technology in Sweden. And I'm probably the reporter that mostly writes about stuff that hasn't happened yet. Um, so right now it's a lot of artificial intelligence, for example.
I mean, it's always struck me as quite odd that people who are interested in shaping our future, they like I'm thinking about Musk, for example. He wants to build these shiny rockets and shiny cars and so on. But I always feel it's such a strange thing to want to build the shiny machine before fixing the human machine, so to speak. So it's like this dream where everything around us is so perfect and shiny and functioning while we ourselves are rapidly disintegrating. It just seems like a strange priority.
He has accomplished quite a lot, but he also has many strange ideas about several different topics. So, but I mean, of course, he's not the only one. It's the prevailing idea that we should make room for others and so on, or that
Mm.
we will be overpopulated. And I mean, that's what we're going to do in this podcast. Try to change some minds, and of course, speak to the audience that already agrees with
Mm.
us. Of course.
So, wanting to live forever or be young forever, it's not a new idea, and I really enjoyed the chapter in your book where you talk a little bit about the history of this idea, though the history of the desire not to perish.
The history of longevity has always been these two opposing forces, right? So there's been the idea that the future is never going to get better, and it's better to die because, as I've said uh, earlier, that we need to make room for new generations and so on. People are clinging on to those ideas, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's also been this pro longevity community, and I think I don't know if it started in China, but certainly the Taoist or Taoist philosophy is often mentioned when pro longevity is discussed. So they were firmly of the belief that we could be immortal, for example, and that was a good thing. Uh, uh, Quite the contrary to a lot of Western ideas about how we should think about that.
And also that we could make ourselves immortal through our actions and through what we could say were the beginning of a kind of scientific mindset, I guess.
Yeah, that you could do it through diet and even different weird sexual routines, and through exercise and so on. But I think mostly the Taoists were preoccupied with the diet, and it was a fairly rigid
Yeah.
diet regime, you could say. The best thing that they could eat, so to speak, was air.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were going to get nutrition from the air. I mean, yeah, and we need air, but it's not nutritious.
It's like the seed to the idea that there's something with the metabolism that generates as a side effect something that kills us. And the idea is that we need to kind of slow down and make the machinery run as clean as possible.
I think they were onto something when it comes to how they thought about diet. They didn't do it the right way. But then again, who does diet the right way even now, right?
Yeah.
So nobody really knows what's the perfect diet. And also they were experimenting a lot. So in that sense, they were proto-scientific, and they kind of evolved into alchemists along the way, right?
So alchemy, what's the core idea there?
Well, the core idea is that you should be able to take some base metal and turn it into some noble metal through a concept called transmutation. And so they were trying very elaborate and complicated and convoluted ways of doing that, and quite different from how science is done today, where we have to make experiments and reproduce those experiments in order to actually prove something or be certain of something. They did their experiments in secret. It was a lot of secrecy around alchemy. But the idea was, I mean, the core idea was that to take a base metal and make it into a noble metal. And why would they want to do that? Well, because they thought that if they could produce this noble metal, they could use it for all kinds of stuff. It was the kind of philosopher's stone idea that we could be immortal, that we could turn stuff into gold. Uh, yeah,
And also, you mentioned a Luigi Conaro, who's a
right.
colorful
And I
character.
mean,
Yeah.
Luigi Conaro was not a scientist in that sense. He was a Renaissance man who lived quite a gluttonous life until he was in his 30s. And then he became ill because he probably ate too much. And so his doctor said that you can't keep doing this because you're going to die. And so he changed his way of living. He started living a life in moderation instead. And, he said that he was done eating when he felt like I could eat a little bit more. I'm not completely full, right? Uh, so he wrote several books about this, like self-help books for the 16th century,
Yeah. Yeah.
which became hugely popular. And I think that one of the reasons for that was that everyone could uh, follow these rules. I mean, you had to eat
Mm.
less, you had to exercise more. These were cheap solutions that everyone could follow if they set their mind to it. And I mean, still to this day, uh, we're probably going to talk a little
Mm.
bit more about exercise later, but it's still the best solution we have for living a long life and stay healthy.
I mean, you found yourself in somewhat of a Luigi Conaro situation when you started writing the book. You're right.
Well, I didn't have any doctors telling me I was going to die, so I probably had some runway
Yeah.
before I was in Luigi Conaro's situation. Yeah, but yeah, I was obese. Uh, no question about it. And uh, I knew that I knew what I had to do to turn it around. But when my publisher asked me, because we were discussing if I should write a book about longevity, and they kept asking me, well, what can you do today to live a longer life? And I wanted to write about the science, what's happening, what's coming
Mm.
next. And so I told them, yeah, these are the things that you can do. I mean, it's not so exotic, but still, they wanted me to live like that for a year while I was working with the book, and that was quite good because I tried to turn things around before, but when I had their book to write and be accountable,
Yeah.
I actually managed to do it.
We are quite fortunate compared to dogs, though. I mean, dogs live a tenth of a human life, or a eighth, or something like that,
Yeah,
depending on breed. Why do we live to, roughly at most 100?
that's a good question. I'm not sure I have the answer to exactly why we live for that amount of time compared to mice or compared to elephants or I mean turtles live longer than we do. You could say that most if you want to generalize it, smaller species have a shorter lifespan, and within species, shorter shorter humans often live longer than taller humans and so on. But why it's settled around 120, give or take a few years, I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's an interesting regularity, that larger animals live longer, but within a particular species, the smaller of these species live longer than the larger. That's
Yeah,
uh,
but I think one idea there is that maybe growth is a little bit slower in smaller
mm,
animals than in larger ones, and uh, as if we're going back to the Luigi Cornaro example, uh, when you do what he did, which is to diet,
mm.
you're actually slowing growth a bit, and that might give you some extra time. And we've certainly seen that in mice, for example, and several other organisms as well.
You write also about certain animals that seem to defy the law that everything that lives ages. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, my favorite one is the naked mole rat. I mean, it looks like a penis with teeth.
It's a very unfortunate look.
Yeah, and still we're jealous of the naked mole rat. At least you and I, and the people in the longevity movement. Uh, we want to be able to live for an indefinite amount of time, and to do that, we need to be ageless. That is to say, if we want to live for an indefinite amount of time, the risk of dying can't increase every year, or certainly not double every eight
Mm.
years, right? So the naked mole rat is a subject for a lot of research right now, to try and find what makes it so
Mm.
resistant to disease. I mean, I, I think it can get cancer, but it's very rare, very rare. I mean, it's almost like it's cancer resistant.
It's a real and incredible inspiration for people with our aspirations, that there are animals that in fact seem ageless. It just shows, like, it's a kind of proof of concept that if anyone is skeptical about the possibility of modifying aging, well, here are ageless creatures. They are possible because they're actual. They exist.
Yeah, yeah, and they've actually now identified a gene that they're going to see if it's if modifying that gene in humans could give some interesting results. Uh, so it's going to be very fascinating to follow what happens there, right?
There's a great variation between how long people live. What is it that determines how long we live?
Well, it depends. A little bit. I mean, for people uh, that live to be over 100 or even over 110, then it's probably quite determined by the set of genes that you have. Uh, and this has been shown in studies, for example, by a researcher in New York called Nir Barzilai, who has studied a community of Jews in New York, who are some of which who are very long lived. And what he's seen is that there are certain mutations in some genes for these people that gives them some kind of protection. So even though that you could see in their DNA that they should get cancer, they should get Alzheimer's decades before they actually get sick, but they don't, right? Uh, they have something. We talk about something called a compression or morbidity as well. So it's often the case when you're that long lived that you're sick only for a short period of time, like a few months or maybe up to a year, and then you die. Whereas without those genes to protect you, um, you probably will be living with a chronic disease for like 8, 10, sometimes even 15 years, and then you die. But if you're unfortunate and you don't have those protective genes, so then lifestyle is much more important. So um, diet, exercise, sleeping well, having good social connections, and so on. The oldest documented person was a French woman named Jean Comment, who was 122 years and 164 days, I think, when she died. And I don't think we have the DNA from this woman, but it wouldn't surprise me if she was protected genetically in some way. Would have been really interesting to. I mean, that's a genome you would like to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think she smoked for 100 years or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. One interesting thing to note about the blue zones. I mean, these are zones in the world where uh, statistically people are living longer than the average, and it's quite profound, right? And these are zones in or regions in Japan. So that's the island of Okinawa, for example, and there's a region in Costa Rica, in Greece, and a place called Loma Linda in California. But there's also the first blue zone, the original blue zone is in Sardinia. And the funny thing about the original blue zone in Sardinia is that it's located roughly 100 kilometers from where my father was born.
The blue zones show us two different things, you could say. They show us, on the one hand, that there are certain lifestyle choices that can be very important for your health, certainly. But they also seem to show, again, that some people are very lucky. They've won the genetic lottery and they have certain alleles that protects them from things that hurt other people, such as
Mm.
smoking and so on. So uh, you have been very interested in finding out more about yourself and if you have won or lost in the genetic lottery.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, yeah. So I've done what is called a whole genome sequencing. So I've looked at uh, every base pair in my DNA, every letter. I see sometimes that doctors are saying you shouldn't do that because you will only get confused. and that's certainly the case. That you do get confused. I mean, first of all, so many traits or phenotypes that you have are influenced by so many genes. So, for example, the company I did the whole genome sequencing with, it's a company called Nebula Genomics, and so they have this risk scores based on genome-wide association studies. So they look at they kind of pool different genes together, and they look at if they see some what kind of result they see from that, right? And so you could see that uh, they add up with new examples every now and then, and so I could see that my risk of getting several different types of cancer is very high. Uh, then again, it says that I should not like the smell of cilantro, which I really love.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, it's a whole universe, your genome, and it would take a lot of time in your life to really understand it all. But I think that what you should do, and you don't need to do a whole genome sequencing for that. You could look at you could do a smaller DNA test to look at, for example, something called the ApoE gene, which is very predicative if you're going to get Alzheimer or not. So you could get three variants there, E2, E3, and E4. And if you get E4 from both parents, your risk of getting Alzheimer's is a lot higher. Should you check that then? Well, I think there is a growing body of evidence now that you could actually reduce that risk quite a lot by lifestyle interventions. So that's one reason that you should check your DNA. I think that in my case, I have a blood disorder that's called thalassemia, and I think I mean, there I could just search for that gene, and there were all these red kinds of warnings
Yeah.
that it was pathological, and yeah, so that made sense because I have that disease, and it's genetic. So another interesting finding when we're talking about longevity is I do have a variant of a so-called longevity gene, FOXO, uh, which when I learned that, I kind of thought back again to Sardinia. I don't know if it has been established that the FOXO gene variants are prevalent in that blue zone, but it has been established that FOXO is a longevity gene, and it shows up in a lot of other studies of really old people. So I kind of think that maybe, even though my father is from just outside the blue zone, that I got some genetic protection from Sardinia. I don't know.
Wasn't there one of these ageless animals that had some equivalent to that gene?
Yeah, so the hydra, uh, small organism that lives in water and has really remarkable uh, rejuvenative capabilities, has also FOXO, and but FOXO in a human has a lot of different roles to play. But it seems like FOXO in a hydra mostly takes care of stem cell regeneration. So it's like they have a fountain of stem cells, or a fountain of youth, you might call
Mm.
it.
So, what are the most important things for people to keep track of?
What you want to check is probably the things that you only check once, and the things that you check somewhat regularly. and the things that you check continuously. And what do I mean by that? Well, the things that you only check once is your genome, for example. Um, and you could be pretty specific. I mentioned the ApoE gene. That's one thing that you could check that really could make a difference for your future life, right? Um, what you should check regularly. Well, we know that your metabolism is extremely important for you to either accelerate damage or slow down the rate of aging, right? If you do an annual health checkup or something like that, you will get most of your answers from there. But of course, you could expand that a little bit. If you do know your triglycerides, if you do know your ApoB, so these are both important for cholesterol metabolism. Um, if you do know your glucose levels and your insulin levels, and you know your blood pressure, you know your weight, you have a pretty good understanding of how you're doing with your metabolic health, right? Um, and they continuously, I mean, that's the most the rate of progress is accelerating the most, right? So you have all these wearable trackers, I mean, the Aura ring, for example, that tracks your sleep, and the uh, watch. This is an Apple Watch, but you could get another watch that does most of the same things. Um, there are different kinds of bands and so on. And the interesting thing about these gadgets is that they are not very precise, right? So you shouldn't really rely on them for anything. You need a measurement with precision, but they could give you some directional input, like, have I been sleeping less for a long period of time, and what could that be about? um, I think that one interesting thing is that they are getting better all the time. So I mean, the Aura Ring, for example, has uh, I think been getting better and more uh, accurate sleep results because they have developed and optimized their algorithm for that. So it's not like you buy a gadget and nothing happens. They develop it and continue to evolve it over time. Another thing that's really really interesting now, and again that's with the Aura Ring, is that they're actually going to try and check your heart health. Uh, you could use the same Aura Ring as the one you already have. They won't release a new ring for this type of measurement, but they are going to try to help you see if your heart health is on the right track or if you're going in the wrong direction. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that, where these devices will help us more and more to keep track of our health.
This could help society as well. I mean, the health costs are rising, and a penny of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting example just from the other day. There's a Swedish company called Neko Health that's co-founded by the founder of and CEO of Spotify, Daniel Ek. They opened their first clinic ever last year. I think they're going to open now one in England, if I'm not mistaken. But they have one in Stockholm, and they've been uh, the one in Stockholm has been open for a year, right? So now they have some data, and so most people that that visit Neko Health are already health conscious people, they don't go to Neko Health because they're feeling sick. They go to Neko Health because they have been enlightened. So they know that I should check my health before I get sick. And the interesting thing is, I mean, they've been fully booked since day one, right? It's a long wait line to get an appointment there. Uh, and I think that was something like 20% of all those people who went in the first year that actually needed some kind of follow up or treatment afterwards. And they didn't go there because they were feeling sick, as I said. They wanted to check on their health. And it turns out that for quite a few people, they needed treatment. And it was a good thing that they caught it early, right?
That could make an enormous
And
difference.
yeah, and also there was not an insignificant number of people that actually had life-threatening conditions that needed to be
Wow.
treated right away. They had no clue about this. Um, so that I think that shows that the healthcare system today, they are not proactive in this, and that's a big problem because chronic diseases is, as we've already said, the thing that we're going to die from and the thing that we're going to suffer from the most in our lives. And the best way to handle chronic diseases is to make sure that as far as it is possible, see to that they don't arrive, right? But the healthcare system today, and in Sweden, it's even not called healthcare; it's called sick care, which is a more it's a more fair word than calling it healthcare, because sick care is just what it
Mm.
is. And so you have to go to your doctor when you're sick, and not before. And this is, yeah, it's backwards.
Mm.
It was good in a time when infectious disease were the most dangerous things, and I mean, it's still good for infectious disease, it's still good for trauma, and those kinds of, if you're in an accident, of course, but the biggest problem that we have today in society when it comes to health is chronic disease, and it's costing nations a lot of money. I mean, I think that um, I think that it's between 10 and 20% of GDP in most nations, in the developed world, uh, that you have to put on just paying for people that need
Mm.
healthcare, and the absolute majority of that money goes to chronic disease.
Well, that is another thing we're going to talk more about with others of our guests, namely the priorities here when it comes to how we spend our research grants and so on. That
Yeah,
it's very reactive. It's about solving every particular disease instead of looking at aging as the root cause. What really is the great killer of mankind if not aging, right? So, uh, what is aging, though?
yeah. I guess people have different answers to that. I think my answer is that aging is mostly an accumulation of damage in our cells, and also in the interplay between cells. So you could say that aging happens even before we're born, in some sense. So we're always, I mean, mostly through regular metabolism, accumulating some damage. But that damage doesn't become pathologic until we're really starting to notice it when we maybe are in our 50s or 60s. Then we start to get diseases, and so we think of aging as something that is happening to us. I mean, we call people adolescents and young, and then we call them middle age and old, and so on. But we're really aging. all the time. It's just that the when the accumulation crosses a certain threshold, that's when we get disease from it.
And unfortunately, the threshold is around 50 when things start happening, 50, 60, and then
Yeah.
it becomes progressively more dangerous to live.
Yeah. I mean, it's like an doubling of the risk, the mortality risk in a given year, every 8 years or so. So, I mean, I have a daughter. She's 10 years old. Her risk of dying, because she's living in Sweden as well. So it's a rich country. So her risk of dying now is like 1 in 10,000. But for you and me,
Mm.
Patrick, it's more like 1 in 300 or so.
Oh dear.
So that's, I mean,
Mm.
that's just absurd.
Yeah.
I mean, 1 in 10,000 for a 10-year-old, and then you get to our
Mm.
age, which is around 50, give or take a few years, right? And then it's, I mean, astronomically
Yeah.
higher. If you go to someone who is 90,
Mm.
it's 1 in 6. So it's like every year they can roll a
Mm.
dice, and that's the risk of dying for them. And eventually the risk is 50%,
Mm.
right? So it's flipping a coin.
And the risk comes from aging that undermines them and make them more susceptible to cancer and heart
Well,
disease and Alzheimer's and so on.
yeah, I think that the Gompertz law only takes aging into account, but then it has been modified somewhat to also take into account that we can, I mean, accidents can happen,
Mm.
and violence can happen and so
Mm.
on. But I mean, the most of us will die from an age-related disease. I think in a country like Sweden, uh, 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 will die from a chronic, non-communicable disease.
You mentioned a paper, the Hallmarks of Aging, that you regard as landmark.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that it is a landmark in the aging field. It was not very original, because Aubrey de Grey put out a similar categorization of different types of damages, which is what the hallmarks of aging really does. It categorizes different types of damages as we age. And Aubrey de Grey preceded that with about 10 years. And so they made a little shuffle of his ideas. That was became the hallmarks of aging. Now, the people that wrote the hallmarks of aging, they don't have this maverick, radical aura around them that Aubrey de
Mm.
Grey has. So maybe that's why it has been given a lot more credibility. But still, I think he deserves a lot of cred for being first there. Uh, yeah, so that came out in 2013. I think that what really made this happen, though, the and by with this I mean the the optimism around that we actually could do something about aging, that we actually could solve aging, uh, really kicked off in the 90s. So that's when a scientist called Cynthia Kenyon managed to show that a mutation in one gene in an organism called C. elegans, a roundworm or nematode worm, um, made the organism live twice as long, right? And I think before that, biologists were told that you shouldn't even bother with aging because it's too difficult. It's no use. It's a career suicide and so on. And what she showed, and she was building on great science from others. I think one of them is called Tom Johnson, if I'm not mistaken, and there were others as well. Uh, But what they were showing was really that aging is malleable. Aging, we can do something about aging. And in fact, it can be done in a simple way. Now, humans are not that simple organisms, but still the result spoke for itself, right? You couldn't really say that we can't do anything about aging. Well, it's simply not true, right? So it became a lot more feasible to actually work in that field, and it became a lot more interesting for a lot of scientists as well. And I think that 20 years later, when the Hallmarks of Aging paper came out, it came out in that time when there were increasingly more interesting results in the lab. There were more scientists working on it, and what they did was they showed in a very simple way that here are the 9 or 12. They have revised it later, but so now it's 12 categories. But it's more or less the
Mm.
same. Is another type of categorization, but around 10 things that happen to you in your cells or between your cells as you age. 10 types of damage, and criteria for it to be included was also that if you modify it, it should be able to accelerate or slow down. So it's something that, yeah, you can do something about, right? And it has been cited a lot. I mean, it's like yeah, it is a landmark paper because everyone talks about it all the time, right? You can't get around it.
So these 9 or 12 things that go wrong over time in cells and perhaps between cells as well, you could say in some sense that this is a definition of aging.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can you give some example of these damages, these or categories of damages?
Yeah, so for example, there are these so-called caps at the end of our chromosomes that are called telomeres. And they're just, I mean, repeating sequences that actually don't code for anything. But, when a cell divides, it has to actually copy the whole genome. And so that the next cell get an identical copy. However, the copying machine, so to speak, is not perfect. So there is a little bit of loss every time, and that's actually why the telomeres are there to have some redundancy. And of course, it's not infinite. So when that uh, redundancy is no longer there, you're starting to actually get some errors in the genome that you might not want, right? And so this was actually one of the favorite ideas also in the 90s, that if we just find a way to prolong our telomeres, we could live indefinitely. That's how simple it should be, like, right? But it turns out biology is seldom that simple. So there's actually an enzyme that's called telomerase that can make our telomeres longer, which is one of the way that when you're newborn, or when you're a fetus, you get a pristine copy of telomeres, because otherwise you would inherit your parents' lousy
Yeah.
short telomeres, which wouldn't be good at all. So there's an enzyme telomerase that can prolong telomeres, but this is also something that cancer cells can appreciate. So it turns out you can't just give telomerase to people because of, among other things, the risk of getting cancer. But yeah, that's one area. Another, if that is quite known, is the senescent cells. So these are a type of cells that really don't go through cell death. I mean, a damaged cell should kill
Yeah.
itself, so to speak. These don't die, but they don't do their normal functions either. They're somewhere in between life and death, so they're often called zombie cells. And the interesting thing about these kinds of cells is that, I mean, we have them throughout our lives, and they help us in different ways. For example, with wound healing and so on. But as we said earlier, once they reach a certain threshold and accumulate, they can cause damage, and they spew out inflammatory chemicals, for example, and they can, in that way, kind of recruit healthy cells to become zombie cells. And that's another reason why they're called zombie cells, right? They can sort of infect healthy cells. And so you can see them in most tissues when you're old, and they can cause a lot of different types of damage throughout the body, depending on where they accumulate.
So in the end, some people die because they're defeated by their zombie army inside of themselves.
Yeah, sure. I think it was Victor Björk who told me that. I mean that it's when you look in some tissue from a 90-year-old, it's very prevalent. It's easy to see their proliferation. It was also Victor Björk who said that a 90-year-old is a sick 25-year-old.
Yeah, yeah, really. Uh, I, I think Aristotle said that he called certain diseases acquired old age. So if
Yeah,
you have a
that's,
really bad cold, it's like you acquired some old age. Uh,
yeah. Of
so
course. I
so
mean, it's
what's out there that looks promising in terms of pharmaceuticals molecules?
yeah. I think this is maybe the time to say that when I say that I'm going to be above 120, it's not because I'm Brian Johnson. I'm. It's a little bit funny, actually. I mean, I have to. I can only blame myself that I've sometimes been called a biohacker, and that people who read my book are really interested in you. You can be interested in how I live my life, what's my protocol, and so on. And I mean, it's really not much of a protocol, at least not anymore. I try to do most of the time. I try to do the right stuff by not eating crap
Mm.
and exercising and so on. But like I'm no Brian Johnson whatsoever, and I think that it's because, unlike Brian Johnson, I don't think neither I or him can live to 120 by doing interventions now. I think that most of what Brian Johnson can hope for is to prolong his life quite a bit, maybe. I mean, he seems to be doing quite okay, but living to 120, no way.
Mm.
I don't see it, because what he needs is science to be done. He needs interventions, like if we're talking about the hallmarks of aging, or the categories, the strategies for negligible senescence that Aubrey de Grey drew up, right? Uh, there's this idea of the damage repair approach, where we're actually going in and repair the different types of damages that happens. We don't have those repairs yet. And so if nothing happens from now on, I'm not going to be 120, and neither is Brian Johnson, right? Um, Still, though, I think there's a lot of interesting things happening. Uh, I think the most promising drug right now in the here and now is rapamycin. Um, it kind of moderates how our cells respond to energy, for example. So we talked about Luigi Cornaro. So he ate in moderation. Well, rapamycin is like you're taking a pill, and it's like you're eating in moderation with that pill, right? And it has had some fabulous results. It has prolonged the lives of mice, for example, in a way that almost no other drug has. And we also know that it's probably pretty safe to take rapamycin if you do it in the right dosage and are careful. It's not something that the average doctor is going to prescribe to you, because what it's actually approved for is um, to give to people that maybe get a new organ from an organ transplantation. So uh, they take a larger dose, and that's not good for your immune system, but it could help the immune system not to reject a new organ. But if you take it in a completely different dosage, it seems to have some really interesting effects. But still, I don't think you're going to get to 120, even if rapamycin turns out to be actually at some point approved for humans to slow down aging, right? Uh, Maybe a more interesting way right now is the idea that we could somehow reprogram our cells. So we already know how to reprogram specialized adult cells, like a muscle cell or a neuron or a heart cell or whatever type of cell, right? We know how to reprogram that to become a stem cell. And that's really interesting because you can do a lot of different cool science with that. But it doesn't really have a, it doesn't really change things when it comes to aging in a human, right? But what if you could take a specialized cell and just not go all the way back, but just turn back the clock to so the cell behaves as it did when you were like 30 years old? And this sounds very science fiction like, but it's been shown both in mice and in vitro that you could actually do that. There's a lot of hurdles to be crossed before we can actually get that in the clinic, but it's a really interesting field, and there's a lot of resources and money pouring into that field right now.
No wonder. When I first heard of this, I thought it was just astonishing. I mean, this is associated with Yamanaka, right? Who got the Nobel Prize. Yeah.
Exactly. So what he showed was that you could take certain transcription factors, and with those, turn back a cell to become a pluripotent stem cell again. And I mean, that in itself is completely astonishing,
Yeah.
right? But then again, I mean, it is also astonishing that we could create new humans out of old humans. So even if we reproduce, say, when we're 20 or 30 or even 40 sometimes, I mean, even if you're 20, you're still a lot older than when you were a newborn, right? But you can still produce a newborn. So what he showed was that we could take that idea and reproduce that in the lab. not produce a newborn, but we
Yeah. Yeah.
but we could make new stem cells from specialized cells.
Is it fair to say it's like inside of us there is a younger version? There's a memory of how we are when we function better.
I think this is something that sounds very similar to maybe what David Sinclair, a Harvard scientist, would say. I'm not going to put words in
Mm.
his mouth, but I thought of him when you put it like that. I don't know if it's right to call it like some kind of memory or what analogy have you. I just
Mm.
know that if you destroy the optic nerve in a mouse, and then you use some of these transcription factors, you can get vision back to the mouse. Uh, and yeah, so and that was also
Yeah.
David Sinclair who showed that, or his lab anyway, who showed that. But just as with telomerase, it's very tricky because they can mutate these kinds of cells and turn into a very nasty type of cancer cell that we definitely wouldn't want to introduce in the body,
Mm.
right? So there's a lot more work to be done, but there's a lot of labs working on it now, and as I said, a lot of resources and money pouring into that field. I think that maybe a few years ago we were talking about senescent cells. Uh, so there's a type of drug that's called Senolytica. The idea is that you should be able to selectively remove senescent cells and keep healthy cells intact, and thereby rejuvenate or heal damaged tissue. And I think that around maybe 2016, 17, there was a lot of talk. Again, like if you look at what the um, like a New York Times or the Guardian or one of these big publishers, when they write about this thing, they tend to portray it in that light, that if we only have telomerase or if we
Mm.
only have senolytica, we're going to cure aging. But it's probably going to be a lot more difficult, and you have to address all the types of damages. But I think that right now, cellular reprogramming is maybe the hottest topics if you just focus on the hallmarks of aging.
Yeah, I mean, it is so radical. One has to let it sink in because this is not about slowing aging, it's about potentially reversing aging.
Yeah, again, I mean, David Sinclair is a controversial figure in the field. People tend to think that he makes too lofty promises and so on. But I mean, that's I mean, he kind of says it out loud that yeah, you should be able to. I think he even writes that as an example in the book, that he describes someone who is at a certain age looking like they're 25 again, or something like that. It's been a
Mm.
while since I read his book, but yeah, but small steps, right? This is far from being proven that we could do, and even further from anything that could rejuvenate our whole bodies. But as a concept, it's quite fascinating. But then again, I mean, you and me both have been to the longevity biotech fellowship retreats, and I have to say that the hallmarks of aging is I mean, it gets quite a lot of criticism there, and they are more into both the idea that we should really need to have a more granular understanding of aging than what these categories can provide, we have to understand a lot more if we want to really intervene, right? Uh, and then they also have this idea, and I mean, that's not their idea, but they seem to be really fond of it. And that's the idea of replacement. That instead of actually finding out what goes on with aging in that kind of detail, we could maybe grow non sentient bodies and gradually replace brain cells. So in that way, we wouldn't need to really know how to repair the damage. We could just replace it,
Yeah. Yeah.
replace a body instead. I think it is, as they say, that would be a lot cheaper to actually find out if it's feasible or not. I don't know if it would be a lot cheaper to actually go through with it and start replacing people's bodies. That's a whole nother ballpark of cost, I imagine. But I think that the replacement idea are going to have some pretty difficult PR problems, right? So it's quite graphic when you think about replacing your head on a grown non-sentient body.
This is something that the listeners will have to get used to. Us
Yeah,
talking about.
absolutely. I mean, yeah, we will definitely talk a lot more about replacement and explain it
Mm,
in a lot more detail than what I'm able to
yeah.
do now, right? I can understand it sounds preposterous, but I think that for me it's not a peer problem at all.
Mm.
I mean, I can understand why it is that for a lot of people, but for me it's perfectly fine. I don't see the problem with it.
It's interesting when we go to these longevity bio meetups and so on. There's a big range of how optimistic people are as well. I mean, the longevity community, it goes from people who are absolutely certain that uh, longevity escape velocity is around the corner, and then others who say probably not going to happen, or it's 1% chance that it's going to happen. So it's a wide range right now. I mean, it's an incredibly exciting time.
I'm a little surprised maybe by the people that are so into that field, um, that don't think exponentially. I do think that it will probably happen a lot faster than most people think, because we are on an exponential trajectory when it comes to both biology, because biology is getting digital, right? And when it's getting digital, it falls under Moore's law. And when it falls under Moore's law, you get this exponential trajectory. So I think that, and just look at what is happening with artificial intelligence right now.
Mm,
We actually don't know if we're going to be able to produce general intelligence systems this decade. I
mm.
mean, people have been talking about this not happening in our lifetimes, or not happening at all, or not happening in 500 years. Now they're talking about it might happen next year, which I don't think, but still. Uh, just imagine the science that could be done if you could spin up an infinite number of, or you would be constrained by your hardware resources, of course, but still, compared to the number of scientists we have in the world today, it would feel like there would be an infinite number of science being done, right? uh, and these might be systems that are super intelligent. And superintelligence is a word that gets thrown out, but it just means that they're more intelligent than humans, or the smartest human, right? So I think that we have reason to be
Mm.
optimistic.
Excellent. So I know you're not Brian Johnson, but could you perhaps share some of Peter Ottsjö's protocol for the road to 120.
First of all, they should start exercising if they're not doing it already. Because, I mean, that's the number one intervention if you want to live long. It's not even close, right? Exercise. And you should probably do a little bit of both strength training and cardio training to really get the benefits. But even if you're a couch potato today, you're just idle, right?
Yeah.
Then you would benefit enormously from just taking short walks quite regularly. It's that simple. Um, so exercise is number one, no question about it. I mean, you could look at supplements or different types of exotic methods, and you don't exercise. Well, don't bother, right? You're just spending a lot of money for nothing. Start with exercising. It's cheap. You don't have to do too much of it if you're very idle today, right? So I try to exercise. Diet. I actually like Walter Longo, the Italian American scientist. Uh, Both his idea of the longevity diet, which is fish and vegan combination. I do think he is a little bit afraid of protein because, as I said, strength training is very important. Not because you want to look like a bodybuilder, but because you want to move things and push things and drag things and just, be able to live your normal life. And for that, you need muscles. And I think that Walter Longo, he's a little bit too afraid of protein. There's a big debate. I mean, protein uh, is when you eat protein, it's associated with growth, right? Growth. But what we've learned from Luigi Cornaro and a lot of science being done in different organisms and so on is that moderation makes us live longer, and one way to achieve moderation is to eat less, and when we eat less we don't grow as much and so on, right? So there's a big debate about protein intake. But I think that I've decided that I need more protein. I think that's the right way for me anyway. Another thing that Walter Longo has created is a fasting mimicking diet, and I've done this a couple of times, and I really really like it. So the idea is that you could get the benefits from fasting, but uh, you can actually eat a little bit. So you do it for 5 days, and you order a box essentially, and you eat what's in the box. It's soups mostly, and some bars and so on. The first 3-4 days is quite boring, but then when you're seeing the finishing line and you feel that I wouldn't say rejuvenating effect, but you feel like a new person almost. Actually, the first time I felt happy, like, really happy when I did it. So I think something must be going on there. So yeah, maybe I would recommend the fasting mimicking diet, especially if you are maybe have problems with obesity or are in the risk zone for getting diabetes and so on. Then I think it could be really beneficial. And then you probably have to do it quite a few times to get the full effect of it. But what else? I mean, I like to measure things. Not like in the Brian Johnson way of measuring things. I don't have his economy. Maybe if I had the amount of money that he has to spend on this, maybe I would be like a Brian Johnson type figure. But then again, he stops eating at like 11 a.m. Uh, I've I've thought about that idea. Sometimes I've even tried it, and it's really quite painful to try to not eat after 11 a.m.
I asked him, I said, I admire your willpower. How much of this is suffering and how much is this fun for you? And he said this is liberating because he's just following this blueprint. He's following the most logical and most perfect plan, and he doesn't deviate. And he felt this is liberating because it kind of takes choice out of every day for him. He just makes like one choice and then he follows the protocol. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can really sympathize with that. I mean, I am inspired by him. I think he has gotten a lot of criticism for lots of different things, but I think he's an inspirational figure for all of us. The idea that you could hand over certain things to an algorithm, because that algorithm takes care of you. It takes care of your health, right? It's really interesting. Um, I don't think I'm not there, and also I don't know what's optimal for me. I don't have the budget to find out, right? It's even though I say that you should measure stuff regularly and you should measure your genome and you should have different gadgets, it's not enough to really know what is the optimal way for me to live. So it's a little bit more of a gut feeling
Yeah.
way for me. And again, he he could, I mean, he could hope for it, but if science stopped today, he wouldn't be able to live to 120. I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
he would age just as the rest of us.
I mean, the point of this pod and all the episodes is for us to find out.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So I think that was a good overview of your fantastic book. This one
Thank you.
I can very strongly recommend it. It's a fantastic introduction and overview, and it takes you from zero and to a quite good level of understanding both the history and the science of longevity.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Patrick.
Peter.